Hello, friends. Welcome to the new Generation Airships project. We're here with another episode, and today we have a special guest. Thank you for coming.
I did it with pleasure. It's an honor to be featured on this podcast.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. Today, we're going to get to know you better. So, we'd like to hear about your journey, how you got involved with the new Generation Airships project, what you did before, who you are as a person. Let's start with that. Tell us a bit about yourself, maybe about your youth, what you were into, where you studied, and your path leading up to the Airship Generation project.
Well, I ended up here not by my own choice, but by fate. I was born into a family where both my mom and dad were engineers. My dad, you could say, was involved in aeronautics almost from the very beginning of his career. So, when aeronautics started to experience a new wave in the Soviet Union, they began hiring specialists in the early 80s when they decided to revive this field, and he got swept up in that movement and came to work at DKBA. So, that's why I can't really say that I just suddenly wanted to get into aeronautics out of nowhere, I mean.
At some point, it just became a part of your life.
Yeah, it's always been a part of my life, strangely enough. Honestly, I can't really say I'm a huge aviation fan. Well, my grandfather was a pilot. My father was an engineer. So it just kind of happened naturally that I ended up in this field since childhood. So, the first time I went up in a hot air balloon was when I was about 9. That's when it all started, when they left DKBA. My father graduated from Bauman University. Both he and my mother were assigned to Korolev for the space industry. She stayed in that field, but it didn't work out for him. He spent a year at TSN-IMASH, then went to work at DKBA. His path was heroic. Every day he commuted 3 hours from Korolev to Dolgoprodny. There and back again. This was back when commutes weren't common Soviet times. So I was jealous of his work when I was little, because I never saw him, and even on weekends he kept working, so much that you just couldn't get through to him. Well then, yeah, it just so happened that in the 90s, he and a friend were making trampolines and all sorts of inflatable figures, and it was all for some kind of public events. I went along, took part in a Moscow parade. Little cars drove by. I was about 16. We lifted them up, did things, jumped, waved. Similar things were at some exhibitions. Later, I had a period connected with ballooning for about 3 or 4 years. This was with standard hot air balloons. His former colleague from DKBA also had his own standard corporate balloons. Can I mention the company name? No. There was NTS, Nescafe. NTS had its logo, Nescafe, a mug. They ordered regularly, and we traveled to all sorts of events. We'd set up those balloons there too, but it wasn't about flying. They'd just stretch out the ropes, and you'd sit.
Are those the same parades where they inflate those huge?
No, those weren't parades. They were just promotional events. City or district days. I spent 2 New Year's Eves in Nevikovo. I'm glad I didn't go. All my friends worked there too. Usually his friend Pavel Kononenko, a pilot who now works as a steam engineer with us, worked there. Blagov was also there. Then the team carried tanks, envelopes, lines, and hustled people around. All my friends were usually there.
Was this some kind of separate organization that was making these very aerostats
Operating them.
of various shapes? And it just so happened that you took part in it somehow?
Yes, I was a member of the hot air balloon crew.
When did this happen? How old were you?
From 19 to 23, we traveled between Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Krasnodar, sometimes ending up in similar cities. What was interesting? Kostromol was interesting. I didn't go to that one. They arrived on City Day, and for the whole day, there were many entertainments, like 5 hot air balloons. So they launched them, and that was it. There were no other entertainments. The whole thing was sponsored by NTS, and as I was told, there were 20 security guards from NTS, 5 balloons, and several thousand drunk people, all trying to break through and wanting to touch the balloons and take a ride. By the end, when they started packing up the balloons, people began throwing bottles at them. Those were pretty rough events. I also found it kind of funny. Like on City Day, we'd set up our balloon, we'd be standing there, and then there's a stage, right? We'd be there, and our job was to warm up the crowd, then we'd pack up, and the main event would happen on the stage. I always had this feeling, you're standing there, and sometimes there's 2 or 3 of us, and the balloon, and a crowd. You walk around, they keep closing in, getting tighter and tighter.
Yeah, and then at some point the stage starts up, and the whole crowd moves over there, and it's like, phew, what a relief. That was really something. If you let a few people in, some would probably fly away with hot air balloons. Give them the chance. Are they that big?
A hot air balloon?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty decent. It can carry about 4 people. They do rides. We just had a different specialty. I mean, usually, well, there are people who specifically do rides. Like, there's a place where you can go fly. They put people in the basket, go up, and fly a certain distance. There are hot air balloons for rides, and there are advertising ones. They're actually the same. We just got paid to stand somewhere among the crowd.
Tell me a bit about your student days. Where did you study?
I studied at my RIA Institute, the Moscow Institute of Radio Engineering and Automation. My major was designer of radio electronic devices and equipment. I didn't graduate from there, if that matters. You can cut that out. Later, I got my bachelor's degree in IT at Synergy Institute. I also once tried to study at a technical college for controlling spacecraft, something along those lines.
So, you had some kind of pull towards space?
Yes, that's right, Korolev.
It's symbolic that it was in Korolev, too. So, tell me a bit about how you actually got involved in the airship project itself, as I understand.
Then I had an airship-related job. I went to China and worked as a ground control operator for a huge aerostat called Puma. After that, I worked for 5 full years at Avir as a test engineer. So we thoroughly tested individual units, and I was also an integral part of the team involved in operations. We had several distinct types of units there.
Sasha, could you please tell us in general, how long ago did you actually join the airship project itself? How did you ultimately end up there? And what exactly do you do here?
I joined the project in November. I was invited.
So you've been here right from the very beginning, since last November?
Yes, last November I was invited to work on the valves, because about a year or 2 ago I was also working on valves at a company called Atlas, which was between Avgar and this project.
So you were already working on that there?
Yes, 2 years ago. I worked with Zelkovich, valves for Brin shipped to the States.
For Bryn?
Through the Israelis, yes, who also work with airships. So he reached out to us through Israel to have them made for him. Yeah, I personally assembled 10 valves myself.
So does that mean your valves are there now? I don't know. Listen, but the very fact that there was such a request and actual orders, that's awesome.
We made a helium transfer system, but they didn't want it. They paid, we built it, but it didn't work.
I guess they were testing different options.
Of course, yeah.
They settled on one concept for themselves.
Yeah, because for them, it's relatively inexpensive to place an order.
So since November, you've been on the project, right?
Yes, on the AERONOVA project. So my current role, together with my colleague Sergei Vereshchagin, we work on VGS units, which are basically fans and valves.
Modeling them?
Yes, we model them in the T-Flex CAD system. That's what we do. We also have a 3D printing area here where we try to print as many parts as possible, even though a lot of our opponents say, why bother? You can just buy everything on AliExpress, and so on. But now that 3D printing has become available, we can print and test complex shapes without having to go to the workshops. How much we can actually make everything out of plastic is still a question, but we try to do as much as possible.
I probably don't agree with those who say, why bother? I think this is an important step because we're moving towards handling most production ourselves, and to do that, we need to go through all these stages.
Yes, we might not succeed right away, but no matter how much people laugh at import substitution, it needs to happen. Even if something turns out worse, it's still worth using that worse option.
To gain experience,
We have our own specialists, and those specialists help train others, and an infrastructure develops because of that.
and that way, we can take on as many areas as possible ourselves.
Yes, it's even an investment in the future, and negative experience is still experience. Of course. I think we should do our best to train as many qualified professionals as possible. Not everyone should just be reselling some parts.
And we should order as few ready-made components as possible. It's better to produce everything ourselves.
It's better not to go into isolationism, but to keep some balance for the main components. Yeah, at the very least, there should be people who've tried, even if they didn't succeed, but based on that, they can even choose products because of what they know. They tried to do it, and now they've gained experience in that area. They understand things more deeply than those who just pick ready-made products.
So how does your work process look overall? Do you start with 3D modeling, or what?
At first, we get a sort of technical assignment from our management. My supervisor is Zubkovich. As a highly knowledgeable individual with a wealth of extensive experience, he meticulously formulates the technical assignment. He might even tell me how to do certain things, but he always takes a flexible approach. If I suggest alternative solutions, he's very understanding about it. So it starts with that. And then, yes, my main role at first is developing the 3D model. After that, we move on to printing from the 3D model. We print it, and then the assembly process begins.
There are also some moving mechanisms, and all of that is taken into account and worked out in the 3D model. Yes, and then we have a test stand. We put it on there. Yes, I think many people have seen it more than once. There is a separate, what is it called?
A universal stand for the air gas system, a receiver.
A receiver, yes. So it's a small, enclosed air compartment where these valves are installed, and that's where they're tested to identify any defects or, on the contrary, to improve the part itself.
And after that, you can install it on the aircraft and see how it works in conditions closer to real life, because a test stand is an idealized environment, but it's already more than fiddling in your hands. You get to see it in real-world conditions. So, the process goes from the technical specifications to computer modeling, manufacturing, testing on the test stand, and then trial operation on the aircraft itself. So, we actually have quite a complete cycle here. And what's more, we're pretty innovative. 3D printing, even though it's become quite mainstream, still faces a lot of skepticism from many people.
But we try to get the most out of it. Plus, the field is constantly evolving. Printers are being improved. Not long ago, you were at an exhibition with Sergey, I know, looking for new solutions and know-how in this field. Materials and technology are getting better.
Yes, this field is developing very rapidly right now. And what's more, it's evolving both towards the regular consumer. Nowadays, a lot of people just set up printers at home and print all sorts of things, but it's also moving in the opposite direction, towards industrial use. Of course, it's not quite industrial in the sense of mass production, but if you need just a few unique items, not hundreds of thousands, then this is already becoming a real solution for those kinds of tasks.
Maybe some people don't know, but now there are printers that can produce parts out of metal. And as far as I personally know, in terms of their overall quality, inherent strength, and precise density, they're just as good as if the part had been meticulously made on a traditional lathe.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. So we're also considering these kinds of technologies and solutions right now, and if at some point we realize we need them, I think,
Yeah.
we'll have that here too. You worked on valves for the Nova 01. I saw that. And now you're working on bigger valves for the Nova 2.
Yeah, the work is already in full swing, so we'll need to buy more printers with a larger build area. But basically, even with the ones we have, we're already working on it. The prototype is almost ready. Yeah, I managed to fit what we have by placing it along the hypotenuse, setting it upright. Of course, I won't be printing the ones that will go on the actual device later, but as a prototype, yes, I printed them. Right now, I'm assembling the moving parts, which I also printed entirely out of plastic. Later, there will be some rods and separate elements made of metal, but for now, to test the kinematic scheme, everything is printed out of plastic, so we can see if it provides the necessary pressure, if it holds up, and we can check all the other parameters.
Plus, using plastic lightens the structure itself, which is critically important for us. On airships, as many parts as possible need to be made lighter to increase the payload.
Yeah. Yes, and it's lighter, and you don't have to machine anything out of some expensive metal. You can test everything first, and then, if needed, make certain parts out of metal.
What else are you working on right now?
I'm working with a colleague to test the fan. That function is partly my responsibility. So my colleague, Sergey Vereshchagin, is developing the fan. He creates the 3D model and prints it. And the work on the test bench, that's partly my responsibility too, because I have a lot of experience at Aver working on test benches. Basically, the prototype of this test bench, or rather, its first version, was developed there. So we didn't design it from scratch here, but instead took an existing idea. So we already had the receiver built, and I understood what measurement equipment we needed, the sensors. I'd also written the program for visual display on the monitor, and for saving data to a file. Everything was ready, so there was no need to invent anything here.
Let me remind you, these fans are necessary for inflating the air ballonnet.
Yes, until we start making rigid airships, we'll need this setup. Fans, or to use a fancier term, APUs, because it's not just fans. There's also a check valve and other components. We have a specialized term for it, the aerostatic air replenishment unit. Yes, and there's also a crucial safety valve. So, these two components work together seamlessly, allowing you to release excess air or pump in fresh, new air depending on the specific conditions the airship encounters at any given moment.
We kind of touched on your experience at Abdur only indirectly. Could you please tell us, how long did you actually work there for?
Well, I worked pretty closely with Avid for about 5 years, yes. So, it was interesting too, because I joined right when there was a state defense order, and I got to observe and take part in all the stages, starting from the R&D phase. So, we would demonstrate small things. For example, whether this rubber was suitable for our task or not, and then all the way up to participating in state trials, when the finished flying vehicle is presented to the government commission. That is, a lot of military people come, and they basically decide whether to accept or not accept this vehicle for use, yes. The company that dealt with electricity under Chubai, I can't remember what it was called. Some big Russian company, basically, that sells electricity to people and businesses. They decided to use airships, specifically airships, to monitor their networks, or rather, their infrastructure. And for the department in Kierzhack, they actually built an airship base. They bought a hangar and a field. A long time ago, it later became some kind of separate entity. Several AU-30s were built, meaning they planned to have equipment on board. They would fly, for example, along power lines and monitor the situation. All of that infrastructure. Yeah.
How successful was this project? Was it implemented?
The airship base and the airship itself were implemented. However, its function of monitoring infrastructure never fully got up and running. I won't even say. I mean, I don't really know the reasons why, but yeah.
Well, maybe in future podcasts we'll ask our older generation. Maybe they know. They've probably heard about it too.
Yeah, Auger had a few more projects to build airships for export. There was one project that I think was the most successful. The airship was operated by a prince in Thailand. I actually spoke directly with someone who lived in Thailand for several years. It truly did fly there, indeed. There was a young prince from the royal family, you see. He was just an aviation enthusiast. He had airplanes, helicopters, and at some point, he decided he wanted to have an airship. So they made him an airship. What size and model was it? It was smaller than the -30 Australian dollars. I don't recall the model name. It was a small airship, actively flying and in use, where Agra employees also lived.
Who helped, let's say, with the maintenance?
Maintenance, yes.
The prince took them under his care, so to speak. Yes. Not a bad project to work on. It was there. Yes, according to his stories, as I understood it, those were the best years of his life. By the way, I'm curious about what happened to that airship later. How did things turn out?
No, well, the envelope became unusable, and somehow making a new one just didn't work out.
And overall, the development of airships in Russia kind of stalled. By the way, why do you think there were so many organizations? Well, not that many, but at least a few existed.
In my opinion, the reason why the whole topic of airships kind of slowed down is because they couldn't compete with aviation, mainly due to their use in military settings, since they were basically two parallel systems. It was hard for them to operate back then because they were both working in the same field and overlapping each other. And in the context of competition, aviation won out because airplanes are better suited for military purposes.
In terms of use, operation,
They don't need hangars for operation, it turned out cheaper. But most importantly, it's because of their combat functions.
back then, the goals were a bit different, military ones. And specifically for military needs, airplanes are faster and cheaper to build. They require, let's say, less personnel to launch them. And overall, they're smaller, more compact, mobile, and maneuverable. For military purposes at that time, this was, let's say, more advantageous. Now, I think, yes, airplanes and rockets will gradually push them out. I'm not sure how much this line of thought fits within the podcast, but rockets and drones. So we'll see in the future who ends up left behind by history. So, what do you think about airships yourself? Do they have a future?
The future of aeronautics is unclear. Well, it's not going anywhere because, roughly speaking, there's Archimedes' principle, right? And that's not going anywhere either. And people will still keep trying to use it little by little. So, one way or another, the forms we're used to, cigar-shaped airships or some other, more advanced, more complex designs. But yes, just as Archimedes' force isn't going anywhere, neither is people's desire to use it. And in one form or another, I think at some point there will be some devices that become a regular part of everyday life.
Personally, I even know precisely who will be making them. The company AERONOVA. How do you envision our work overall, specifically in the field of airship construction, say, in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, it all depends on stability. I mean, I've seen many times that if there's stability and a group of people is together, and as long as their leadership isn't completely crazy, internal connections start to form, and they still manage to produce results, to avoid a standstill, unlike the fable of the swan, crayfish, and pike where everyone pulls in different directions. Unity is key. But if there's at least some kind of forward progress, some development, if things move steadily, then results start to show up as well.
It seems to me we're moving forward systematically, step by step. That's exactly why we start with a small airship, then a bigger one, then a third, and so on.
Yeah, this whole concept that we have, like Nova 01, Nova 02, then 835. Yeah, if things keep developing like this, I think it won't be long before even I, honestly, will be surprised, but it'll be a pleasant surprise that airships will be flying over Russia, and maybe not just over Russia. I know you also have your own ideas about where they should be flying.
I'll definitely share that information on another podcast, perhaps.
So yeah, we actually have some team members who believe that they shouldn't just be limited to the country's region, that they should be flying in the atmospheres of other planets. And actually, maybe not everyone knows this, but aerostats have flown on Venus. Yeah, We have Dmitry Sergeyevich Khmel, who launched them there. In the 80s, yes, the USSR did things like that. When I first heard about it, I thought it was science fiction, but really, such projects did exist. So maybe airships and aerostats on Venus aren't that far off.
Still, I truly think that we should first master our very own skies and the challenges they present before we consider moving on to other distant planets.
Yes, our expanses are vast, boundless, and still largely unexplored, and really not explored at all, yes. Again, there's this idea that people have basically mastered, so to speak, the Earth's surface and now want to expand further into the depths of the oceans and higher up as well. And there are still untouched areas, like the stratosphere, for example, where airplanes can't really fly properly. Airspace, yes, has long fascinated people. Of course, you can't say it's completely safe, given the altitude. But yes, I think flying cities are still waiting for their time. They could very well be compatible with someone, after all. Of course, I'm just speculating here, but it's entirely possible to have some kind of magnetic fields, partially gas reservoirs, and this gas could be connected to, say, biochemistry or biogenetics. There could be some modified organisms living there, producing gas and filling these reservoirs. Plus, yes, some kind of magnetic fields, cushions, right? In fact, you don't even have to fantasize. Just look to the future and see that this can and should work.
The first step for this will be to launch an airship into the sky.
And that's why, yes, we shouldn't forget about such technologies. They should always remain in focus. Maybe not a large public, but certain groups should study and keep aeronautics in mind. And they should constantly try to apply it here and there, to take some new and emerging technologies and try to effectively use them, because this is crucial groundwork that absolutely shouldn't be lost or forgotten.
At the very least, I'm just genuinely curious and deeply interested in thoughtfully bringing airships back, but at a truly modern, sufficiently advanced technological level that we possess today. Because as I thoroughly understand it, since those historical times, there haven't been any truly significant or groundbreaking major breakthroughs in this particular field. And now, with our current capabilities, we can really create a remarkably modern craft by effectively applying the innovative solutions and cutting-edge technologies readily available to us today. And it would already be a worthy craft, capable of effectively handling its tasks. And by steadily improving it, we can implement even better solutions. You could even make a real spaceship out of it. Who knows?
Yes, that's exactly right. If you don't rush straight into building giants, but instead take small steps and apply technology along the way. Maybe, if some problems come up somewhere, we could wait a bit for these technologies to develop, and in the foreseeable future, I think airships will be cruising across our planet.
Even without waiting for any additional technologies, they were already working 100 years ago. Basically, it's the same thing that was done 100 years ago, but now with modern solutions, using new materials, engines, batteries, and all the necessary artificial intelligence. And it already works, just like it did in the past. Only now it's more efficient, more environmentally friendly, and even safer.
What's more, I recently watched a blogger live streaming from Switzerland, and to my surprise, a dirigible flew in the background over the Alps. If I hadn't known it was a dirigible, I probably wouldn't have even identified the object, but as I looked, I realized what it was. So you can't say they've been forgotten or they don't exist. They do exist, just in very limited numbers and serve specific functions. Yeah, so now they're used for tourism or sometimes for certain specialized scientific tasks. I recently saw the Chinese launching a huge aerostat on the Himalayan plateau, lifting it to several thousand. I might get details wrong, but not 10 kilometers high. The volume was 9,000 cubic meters. For some reason, they needed it.
Yeah, actually, there are a great many important tasks they can perform. Things like tele and radio communications, observation, and geology, for example.
These particular tasks are pretty specialized, primarily because, after all, there are satellites and drones. But even with the advanced technologies we have now, they can definitely fill a certain important and specific niche. And yeah, the main thing here is for the team and the technology to keep working, because from what I see, for example, watching the team my father is part of, and just looking at the life of the ballooning community in general, it happens kind of sporadically, from time to time. People get together for a while, work for 3 to 5 years, a team forms, but then suddenly it all just stops existing. Only a few devoted enthusiasts, real fanatics, stick around while the main group moves on to other projects. Then, suddenly, funding appears again, or someone gets interested, and people come together once more.
A new wave of interest.
And that's how it happens, right? It's not like there's a single focused path of development. It comes in these bursts. So you can't say that everything is completely lost, but there isn't any steady, systematic progress either.
Tell me, how do you feel about the atmosphere in our team overall? Do you like everything? Do you get along with everyone, so to speak?
Honestly, I was surprised by the atmosphere here. When I joined and saw that people genuinely wanted to build a flying machine, it really amazed me. So, there really is a friendly atmosphere here. Of course, there are some nuances, but overall, it's a truly creative environment that encourages making things. It seems like even in the media space here, people have room to grow. You can really create without too many restrictions, even in a technical sense.
In the field that a person is knowledgeable about.
Yeah, exactly. I was surprised myself. It's not just about aeronautics here. We have a department that works on engines, and there's even a department focused on advanced developments, practically creating space engines. I was honestly so surprised, because I thought it would just be about airships at most, maybe some streams or something. But no, it's actually a whole community of people here. And yeah, everyone is passionate about their own work, which allows us to grow in this direction, because one way or another, it's all interconnected with the main thing we're doing. And it's really fascinating to watch how people, who at first glance seem to have nothing in common, start connecting with each other. At these intersections, new creative ideas emerge, and something truly unique can come out of it, just like it often happens when people who seemed incompatible at first come together.
So, airships are just indeed truly the very beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, but I think we'll wrap up our podcast here. Once again, thank you for finding the time to come and chat with us. I'm sure we'll meet again in future episodes and talk about other topics. And thanks to everyone who watched us. Subscribe, leave comments, ask interesting questions, let us know who you'd like to see next on our podcast series, and we'll see you there. Bye, everyone. Thank you. See you soon.